Today, we're going to be talking about differentiating instruction. And this is, I want to let you know, it's a 2 hour session. Of course, feel free if you cannot stay the full 2 hours to come and go as you need to, but I'd encourage you, if you can, to stick with us the whole time. We're going to be doing talking about a lot of different things today, and hopefully giving you some really practical tools about how you can facilitate ESL classes, both online and face-to-face, and with a wide variety of learners. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about myself. So my name's Katie, and I'm just so glad to be with you today. I'm down here in Dallas, Texas, and so not too far away. And just a little bit about me. I do a lot of work with Tex TESOL, which is our Texas ESL professional organization down here. I've been president of the Dallas-Fort Worth chapter, and I'm currently serving on the executive board still. I love linguistics. That's what my PhD is in. Love language acquisition. So I specifically do a lot of things in ESL. And then I just love learning. I love pedagogy. I love talking about how to be a good teacher. I am a teacher myself. I have taught both in K-12 and in higher education and doing community-based ESL programs as well. So I have kind of a broad range of experience. And I've also taught online and hybrid and face-to-face. I was one of the fortunate ones that when the pandemic came along, the online learning wasn't new to me because I have been teaching online for about 10 years. And so today, as we're talking, I'm going to be bringing in examples from both face-to-face classes and online classes, because I don't know what your situation is right now, what it looks like for you. And so we'll be sure and talk about both contexts, so that way it will, regardless of where you're teaching currently or what your program looks like, hopefully these are tools that you can use today. I currently work as a teacher trainer and enjoy doing that, especially for Cambridge, who is hosting our learning today. Ahu, thank you for sharing in our chat that you majored in linguistics too. Love language people, so fantastic. We're going to start off. I want to know a little bit about you and who you are. And so we're going to be using a couple of different tools today so that we can communicate with each other. And so the first one that I'm going to use, which I love and encourage you to use in your classrooms too, is called Mentimeter. And so it's real easy if you have a phone, or if you can pull up, I just dropped my phone there. If you can pull up another browser on your web, on your web page, then and go to menti.com. And then if you'll use the code, and I'm going to type this in the chat so that way everyone has it, it's menti.com. The code is 28017721. When that pulls up, you should see a map of Arkansas. And so I believe that most everyone here, even though I'm down here in Texas, I'm curious where you're from. And so if you'll just touch the map wherever you are in Arkansas, I can get a sense of kind of where everyone's coming from today. So I'm going to switch over to that map and see if anyone's been able to add theirs yet. Hopefully you're seeing my screen with the Arkansas map. So menti.com. And then if you are not in Arkansas, then feel free to put a dot in Texas. That's fine. That's where I am. Maybe I'll add my dot real quick while we're doing this. So menti.com. And you may have to, it may be small on your phone, so you may just kind of have to guess where you are in Arkansas. And the code is 28017721. All right, starting to get some answers. I'm going to put myself down here in Texas. Okay, we got our two Texas. That's look like we've got Little Rock, kind of some up in the, what would that be? The northwest corner. So good, we're starting to get some dots there, see where you are. My family is from Texas, so I was born in Texas, but I moved to Tennessee when I was in second grade. And so But my grandparents and other family members still lived in Texas. And so we made that trek from Texarkana to Memphis many times in my childhood. And so I feel like I know that road well, Arkadelphia and Texarkana and all of those into Little Rock and beyond. So if you're on that route, I've been on your roads before. But some of you that are kind of up there in the north, I don't know that I've been up in that part. So I'm glad to know where everybody's from. And then I'm going to switch slides real quick. And if you could answer this next question for me as well, it should just show up on your phone or on your web browser. I'm curious how familiar you are with the concept of differentiation. So is this something that is this a word that you know? Is this a word that you've heard before? Is this something that you would say, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with what this is? Would you say, I have a strong knowledge about this and could even teach others about it? Let me know kind of where you are. You see our dots are moving on the screen. It looks like a lot of us have a working knowledge. Some people sounds familiar, but not exactly sure. Let me go. I'm going to do mine real quick. Here we go. I'm going to put in that I know a lot about it and teach about it since I'm leading the session today. So hopefully that brings some relief. Okay, we got a few more that sounds familiar, but not exactly sure. Good deal. Well, that helps me to know kind of who's in the room today. So thank you for participating in our Menti. We will do another couple of things like that throughout the session. So if you'll keep your phone handy or just keep that second browser up, we will, I want to hear from you and want to hear what your experience has been. And since we're a little bit of a smaller group, only 20 participants so far, also at any point, if you have a question or if you want to share your own experience, since many of you do have a working knowledge, please feel free to just let me know. Just turn on your mic and interrupt me and say that you want to share something. I'm more than happy to hear your expertise and know what's going on in your classroom. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about differentiation so we can make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. When we talk about differentiation, generally the scholar, the name that we associate with this is Carol Ann Tomlinson. She is a professor in Virginia, actually, another place where I lived growing up. I lived in Tennessee and then we moved to Virginia. So that stretch, we still drove through Arkansas. You still had to go through Arkansas to Tennessee to Virginia. So I drove that stretch my whole life. But Carol Ann Tomlinson is at the University of Virginia, and she has studied this concept of differentiation. Her work is largely geared towards K-12 instruction. And so a lot of what we know about differentiation, especially if you were to read these books, which I put here on the screen, you would say this really doesn't relate to adult ed. And because of the conference right here, most of us are teaching in adult ed classrooms. And so you wonder, does this apply to us? But what I found is that you can take these principles and concepts of differentiation, even though they were originally kind of organized around a K-12 classroom, and seamlessly apply them into adult ed. And that's what we're going to do today, is talk about what does that look like. Let's see. Oh, Wendy said that she followed Carol Ann Tomlinson in her previous life as a GT teacher. That's fun. So you come out of the K-12 world, Wendy. So you know, this is commonly talked about in that world, but in the kind of adult ed world, this is not something that's really part of our training necessarily. And so I find that a lot of adult ed teachers are not as familiar with this work. So I'm glad that you are, though. Thanks for sharing that, Wendy. Appreciate it. Okay, so what is differentiation? So this is straight out from Carol Ann Tomlinson, who wrote the book literally on this. She says differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular student or small group of students, rather than teaching a class as though all individuals in it were basically alike. So the idea is that we're not teaching a one-size-fits-all class. We're recognizing that each of our learners is different and has different unique needs. And so we are tailoring or customizing our instruction to that student or to a small group of students, instead of just doing this kind of broad shot, one-size-fits-all instruction. My favorite way to think about differentiation, just a metaphor that works well, is the metaphor of a mountain, climbing a mountain. Let's see, you guys in Arkansas, you have some mountains, right? Getting kind of into the Ozarks. Down here in Texas, it's pretty flat. So this metaphor doesn't always resonate as much down here, but the idea is that when you are teaching a class, everyone's climbing that mountain together. Everyone is heading to the same place. We're all trying to reach the summit, the very tip of the mountain. That's the goal of our learning. But not everyone is going to get there the same way. Someone like me, who's not particularly athletic, don't particularly love to exercise. If there's anyone like me in the room who the idea of trekking up a mountain is overwhelming to you, that's where I am too. It would take me a long time to get to the top of the mountain, and I would probably need a lot of support to get there. Whereas others who do this more frequently, maybe they hike, maybe this is a regular part of their life, they wouldn't need to take the long windy path that I would probably need to take. They could probably get there a little bit faster and wouldn't need quite as much support. And that's what our classrooms look like, is that we're all headed to the same place. We're not asking our students we're not changing the curriculum for them in the sense that we're not changing our expectations about what they're going to learn. But we may be changing our expectations about how we're going to get there, knowing that not all learners are going to take the same path. So if you think about, here's just a visual that kind of explains that. There's just lots of different routes up the mountain, and everyone takes a slightly winding path. If you think about this picture, and I'm going to invite you either in the chat or if you feel brave and want to unmute and share your thoughts, if you'll take a look at this picture, you've got a group of folks that are hiking here. What supports do you notice that they have to help them get up the mountain? And then what is different about them? Do they all have the same supports? So what supports they have, and do you notice anything that might be the same or different between the different hikers? What do you notice? Feel free to unmute or feel free to type in the chat, either way. Okay, Amy says some are in boots and some are in tennis shoes. Yep, okay, and Marcia said same thing, good shoes, but different. They all have good shoes, but they have slightly different shoes. So yeah, we noticed that. It looks like this person right here has some kind of a hiking boot, whereas this person behind looks like is wearing some kind of tennis shoes. So everyone has shoes, but not necessarily the same kind. Some have walking sticks, so they're needing that additional support for balance. Others don't need that at all. Most are carrying backpacks, it looks like, but some have slightly different types of backpacks. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for contributing. So you could see, everyone's kind of going the same direction. Not everyone has the same supports. Sometimes someone like me might even need some canned oxygen along the way, right? They may really need some help making sure that they can make it up to the top. So this is actually, I didn't realize, kind of a common thing that happens. I have a friend in Colorado who was sharing that sometimes they'll take canned oxygen on some of their hikes, especially when they have Texans in town hiking with them. So sometimes we need a little bit more support. This is what differentiation looks like. And so practically speaking, there's 3 different types of differentiation. And so I want to kind of briefly review these 3 types before we talk about what this looks like, how we can actually do this in our own classrooms. So first type of differentiation is differentiation of content. And so this is when you're customizing the input or what students learn. So as an example of this, about a year ago, right when the pandemic started, I was already teaching an online course, actually. It started online and then everyone went online along with us. But in this particular course, I needed my students to know how to use the library. We were doing some research, and so it was really important kind of foundational skill that they knew how to go to the library and get some books. I had some students that they were very familiar with the library. They had done lots of research in their days. And this happened to be a higher ed course. It wasn't adult ed, but higher ed. And so, they had done research papers and they were very familiar with how to navigate the library. And I had other students who, really, this was their first time doing any kind of research. And so they really didn't even know where to start. And so as I thought about what am I going to teach these students this week, I realized I really needed to differentiate the content that week. I needed some students to do like a Library 101 lesson, and I needed some students to do a kind of Library 102 lesson, or a how do you go more in depth in your knowledge of the library. And so in this case, the goal, the tip of the mountain that we were all trying to reach, was being able to use the library for research. But the content, the input that I gave them, some kind of got a more basic introduction and some got this kind of higher level. That's differentiating in content. Sometimes we differentiate in process. Process is how students go about making sense of ideas and information. And so, so sometimes we're not going to be differentiating the actual lesson that we're giving them, the input or what they're learning, but instead it's how they make sense of that information. I'm a linguist, as we talked about, and so I love teaching grammar and linguistics and things like that. And so at one point, I was teaching a class on verbs and really sentence structure. And so we were talking about transitive verbs and intransitive verbs and linking verbs and action verbs. And man, my students were so lost. I could tell I had taught the lesson and I could tell they're not with me. And that happens sometimes, even with really experienced teachers, right? Sometimes they're just not with you and you realize I've got to do something different. And so I went home and I made this map, and it was like based on this metaphor with, there was like a guy getting in his car and he was going to fill up at the gas station. And then he had to go to the auxiliary auto shop looking for auxiliary verbs. Then he went to Main Street looking for main verbs. And then he was going to different houses depending on the types of verbs they're looking for. Well, I gave this to my students, and all of a sudden, many of them, they understood what we were trying to learn. I was able to help them make sense of these ideas. But I had some students, and thank goodness they were comfortable sharing with me. They said, you know what, Dr. Welch, I do not, there's too many colors, there's too many arrows, like there's too much going on. I'm still not with you. And so I took that same information and I made a black and white version that just was kind of read this question and answer yes or no. And then depending on where you go, you just follow the yes or no's of the boxes. And this is literally the exact same information, same stuff, but the way that students make sense of it, the way that they processed it was slightly different. And so this is differentiation of process. And then the third way, so we had content, we had process. The third way is differentiation of product. And so product is when you differentiate the output, the actual thing that students produce to demonstrate what they have learned. And so sometimes you need to differentiate in content, sometimes process, but a lot of times we see product differentiation where students have the option of showing what they know in a couple of different ways. So one example of this in my own classroom is that, especially online classes, a lot of times we want students to demonstrate their knowledge through typing something. So through some kind of written task. This could look like a discussion board or something like that. And sometimes if you're a writing teacher, for example, you need them to write their answers. But sometimes you're just trying to find out what they know, what is their knowledge on this particular topic. And so you don't necessarily, it doesn't matter if they let you know through writing or if they let you know orally. And so often I will give a choice to my students that they can either write their response in a discussion board, or they could use a program like Flipgrid, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is a great speaking app where they can actually record themselves giving a response. And either way, I find out what they know. I find out, have you learned the thing that I was teaching you? But the way that they show me that their output is slightly different. So that's a type of differentiation in product. Okay, I see Jaylyn, I hope I'm saying your name right, was asking, how do you do all of this without spending hours of lesson planning? Yep, it's the $1,000,000 question. I'm so glad that you're raising that. That's where we're headed, is how do you do all of that? It's because it seems very overwhelming as a teacher to think, okay, I have X amount of students, maybe 20 students. I don't know how large your classes are. How in the world am I going to customize or tailor instruction to each of these students based off of all of these different factors? It seems like you'll spend forever lesson planning. That's a real fear. And it is true that you could spend hours and hours and hours lesson planning. We're going to look at some tips today to make it so it's not so, but just just to briefly answer the question, you do not want to differentiate in content, process, and product in every lesson every time. You will drive yourself crazy and your students. So this is not one of those things where you want to go in full force on everything that you're doing and try each of these different types of differentiation. Instead, usually just choose one lesson and one thing that you could do to make it more differentiated and start there, see how it goes. And then gradually, as you feel more comfortable adding in these tools, that you can increase your repertoire of differentiation over time. But my advice is go slow and keep realistic expectations for yourself, because you could just drown yourself in work otherwise. But we'll talk more specifically as we keep going. Yeah, okay. You said, I'm just going to read real quick. You said that's the problem that you're running into. 30 students, all at different levels, from absolutely no English at all to top A level, 6 students and everything in between. Yes. And trying to facilitate groups. And it's hard. Yes, you're right. It is. I'm with you. So let's see how we can think about that. All right. So here today, we're going to talk about 4 foundations of a differentiated classroom. These are kind of the 4 steps. And depending on where you are in your own teaching today, you may say, you know what, I just need to do step 1. I just need to work on getting that step 1 down, and I'll worry about the other steps later. But for some of you, you may be more into step 3 or 4. And so we're going to kind of start at the beginning. How do you plan for a differentiated classroom, all the way up to how do you actually manage your time? And what does that look like? And then if you happen to be using Cambridge curriculum, if you happen to be using Ventures, we're going to look specifically, if that was your curriculum, what a real day in the life of a differentiated teacher would look like. If you're not using Ventures, that's okay. It's just an example. You should be able to still take those same principles and apply them into your own classroom. Okay, so let's talk about step 1. Ensuring student-centered instruction. So the very first thing that you have to do is, if you want to differentiate, is you've got to make sure that your classroom is student-centered. You have to give students ownership of the learning process. So what does that mean exactly? Usually when you have a student-centered classroom, you have student voice and student choice being central. And so maybe you've heard these terms before. There's the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. And you see these 2 pictures here. The sage on the stage is kind of your typical lecture-based classroom, where you have a teacher who's up at the front of the room doing all of the talking. Students are passively absorbing all of this information. And occasionally students may answer questions or whatnot, but it's definitely teacher-centered. The opposite of that is the guide on the side, or the student-centered classroom, where you have students working in a lot of small groups together, and the teacher is facilitating those groups. The reason you're doing small groups is so that students' voice can be elevated, so it can be utilized. If it's just the teacher talking the whole time, then it's harder to let those students use their own voice, and it's harder to give them choices over their learning if it's all in this kind of very structured lecture-based format. So kind of step one is choosing that student-centered instruction. Here's a picture that I wonder, again, if this is an example perhaps of a student-centered classroom. And I wonder what you notice about this particular classroom. What are some things that you observe? If you wouldn't mind throwing in the chat, what do you see in this picture? Or if you want to be brave and turn on your microphone and share with everyone, we'd love to hear your voice too, if you feel inclined.
Well, for starters, they're all in a different location, and it looks to be like they're using different learning materials. For example, we have the computers at the table, or what looks like technology. Those sitting look like they're kind of maybe doing a board game, so it's a different type of activity. And then at the table closest to us, it looks like they're making sentences. So they're all doing different activities maybe that relate to how they best learn or what they choose to learn that day. And they're even different in the ways they're sitting. We have a group that's very close, a group that's sitting in chairs, and a group that's looks like they're doing a little bit more independent practice, but still together.
Perfect. Yeah. What a great answer. Thank you. And am I saying your name correctly? Is it Jalen? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. You actually said it.
Good. I just want to make sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jalen. Everything you said are things that I observed too, that you've got lots of different groups, that they are kind of looks like they're doing different tasks or maybe the same task in different ways. You even pointed out that you have different seating. And so you notice that not everyone is sitting in rows and in the same chair even. So there's you see a lot of choice here where students potentially could have chosen where they're seating perhaps, or how they're making sense of information. I do see some people back in the back playing chess, so I'm not sure what to make of that. Maybe they finished early or something. But and then you notice the teacher looks more like that guide on the side as opposed to the stage on the stage. Let's see, Ahu said each group is doing something different. And Gina said students learning in a relaxed environment. Yeah, it does look kind of relaxed. It kind of looks like a fun classroom. Now, fun for the students, it does take a lot of work to structure this type of classroom, which again is what we want to talk about today. So first step is trying to come up with a classroom that looks like this. Now, when I say looks like this, that doesn't mean you're going to go on Craigslist and buy beanbag chairs necessarily, especially some of you may still be teaching online. But how can we get this same vibe injected into our classrooms? So here's a couple of kind of suggestions of things that you might want to incorporate it into your classroom to elevate student choice and voice. One is the example of choice boards. We've seen this, especially during the pandemic, become kind of a popular thing to do. And the idea is that you are asking students, saying, here are some choices of things that you can do, either as a way to demonstrate your knowledge or as a way to make sense of what we're learning, and you can choose. And so here's a bingo, like a bingo version. If you wanted to do a bingo version, there's like a tic-tac-toe version over here, where you see both of them have like a free space in the middle, and then maybe they're trying to like make the tic-tac-toe 3 in a row type thing, or maybe they're trying to get bingo on the board, but you're giving them different options of how they can reach whatever learning goal it is you have for them. And yes, I'll for sure, Jalen, I'll get you a PDF of this so that you can have all of this for later. Here's another example. This is one came out of K-12, I think, but this was specifically an ESL choice board. And this teacher decided to organize it by the language domains. So listening, speaking, reading, writing, and then miscellaneous. And so the students had 2 options for listening, and they could decide which of these 2 options they wanted to which of these two tasks they wanted to complete. They had 2 options for speaking, 2 options for reading, 2 options for writing. And so this is one way to do a choice board when you're working with English learners. Another way, this one's kind of out of control, so I'm going to skip that one. This one I thought is interesting because this person chose to organize their choice board by learning preferences. And so, for example, if you have students that are especially musical, you could have a choice where for them to demonstrate their knowledge, they can write a song or a chant or a rap. If you have someone that's more linguistically minded, you might give them some sort of a verbal task or something that has to do with language. And so this was thinking a little bit more about student preferences. I had a class one time where I got to know them at the beginning of the semester, and it became really clear that this was a very musical class. They were all in a band, or they all played an instrument, or they just all really liked music. And as I learned that about them, I realized, you know what, I could give a choice for a project that we have coming up, where usually it's just like the students give an oral presentation, or that maybe they give a PowerPoint or something like that. But instead, I'm going to do kind of a choice board for that activity. And I'm going to give one of the choices to be that you can create a song instead of a PowerPoint. And that's how you can show me what you've learned. And so sure enough, because I had all these musical people, I had quite a few students who decided that's what they wanted to do. And so we were learning about the history of the English language. That was our topic. And so I got all these great songs from all of these students about the history of English. That was just an example of they're all still learning the same information, but it's just a way to tap into their unique personalities or interests and give them a choice. There is a great resource. Mrs. Park is an ESL teacher. Again, she's in the K-12 world, but a lot of the materials that she creates are completely usable for adult ed. And so she has created this kind of choice board for online learners who maybe are going to be doing some independent work they're going to work on an exercise or an activity. And she has made it to where you could choose the teacher help breakout room, where you're wanting the teacher to support you because you think, I don't think I can do this activity by myself. I want a teacher's help. Or you can choose the open group room where you're saying, I want to turn on my mic and camera and talk about today's work with my classmates. So that's the kind of room I want to be working in on this activity. Another room is I want to ask questions and share ideas in the chat. So more chat-based folks go in the quiet room. And then like the super quiet room is the I want to work by myself on this activity. And so she's giving a choice as to what environment this different students can choose to do their work, whatever it is. So she has a lot of really awesome stuff. So down here at the bottom is her what do you call it, website. I'm going to type it into the chat real quick. Mrs. Park free. Oops, nope, mrspark.org. I got all excited about the free and put it too early. mrspark.org/free. Anyway, you can find some of these Google slides that are awesome for differentiation. Okay, so Jaylen was asking, do you have an example what this would look like for completely beginner ESL students that can't read or understand any English? And I'm discouraged to do any translation in class to native languages. Yeah. Yeah, so I think in that case, you could still do a choice board, but you probably would want to, for example, use some kind of icon or picture to help them understand what the task is, just as a place to get great pictures or icons is I'm going to type this in the chat too. Google this. It's called the Noun Project, but it is a repository of icons that are like for words you would never think of, like, oh, that's too abstract of a concept. I can't imagine them having like an image for that. You can find it at the Noun Project, and it's free as long as they have some rules about that. You have to make sure that the fine print saying who you're crediting for the image, as long as you keep that intact, they'll let you. they'll let you use their images. So anyway, so I would encourage, if you're going to do a choice board for beginners, make sure that you're pairing the task with some kind of image so they can better understand, and then probably model for them what that's going to look like. So make sure that you have shown them the steps to be able to accomplish whatever it is, because those two things are going to help them understand what you're trying to communicate. Okay, so hopefully that helps. So we talked about student choice boards. Now, how do we elevate student voice? There are many, many ways to do this in a classroom. One that works well both in online settings and face-to-face settings that I have used with all sorts of learners is an app called Flipgrid. I love Flipgrid so much because it gets your students talking. You may have the issue, in fact, Jalen, if you are teaching the beginners, you may have the issue where they are just overwhelmed and nervous, and in a Zoom room, if you're online, they're terrified to turn off their mics, or sorry, to turn off mute, and to actually speak to their classmates. They may be terrified to turn on their video so they can be seen. And so this Flipgrid creates a space where it's less intimidating to speak because they're just speaking into their phone. I use Flipgrid when I want my students either to speak directly to me, so you can configure the assignment to where only you as the teacher see that student's response. So they're not like all the classmates seeing it. Or you can configure it to where your students do see each other's videos and can respond to each other. So they can talk to each other, or they can just talk to you, depending on, you'll have to decide which is right for your teacher, for your classroom. So I like it because I can listen individually to my students. I can hear each of their voices, not just the ones who are extroverted or who are, super chatty and always wanting to talk, but you can hear all of them. You can, not just for listening skills specifically to see how their English is coming along, but you can also hear their ideas, see how they're doing. You can do student-to-student interaction, and it's also really customizable for different personality types. So if you have those students who, you can't even imagine that they would make a video of themselves because they would just seeing themselves on the screen, there's an audio only option where you can turn off the video part and they're just recording their voice. If you have that like zany, kind of fun-loving, extroverted student who loves emojis and filters and all of that, Flipgrid also has all of these great features that you can, like last night, I saw someone showing that you can make yourself into an astronaut through a filter on Flipgrid. So anyway, there's a huge range for personality types. Students and teachers both will need a device. You can do it without an app, but if you're using your phone, you would need the app. So it's pretty easy to set up. I just wanted to show you kind of what it looks like, just so you can see how it works in a classroom. I am involved in a faith-based program in Texas called Literacy Connects Us that trains a lot of faith-based ESL programs. And so this is a Flipgrid that group made, so we could just kind of show what a Flipgrid looks like. And so I just asked the different trainers that are involved in that to just make a quick video introducing themselves, telling us how they pronounce their name. I love Flipgrid for that, because it's so important when working with English learners to try to pronounce their names correctly. It's why, Jalen, I wanted to make sure I was doing yours correctly. It's, nobody wants their name butchered. And so I love Flipgrid because I can capture them saying their own name, and I can go back and play it over and over again and try to learn it. So anyway, that's what I'd ask them to do, is tell us your name, how do you pronounce it, and then just what do you like about being this trainer for these faith-based groups. And so this is the Flipgrid that we created. So take a look. Let's see. So I'm scrolling down and you can see we've all made our little videos. This is mine. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Welch. I'm one of the newer text trainers. And I just showed just a brief clip of my video there. And then here was one of my colleagues responding to me.
Hi, Katie. I wanted to share that I did have to actually log in after I got the link.
And he was just giving me some information about kind of how it works. And then you can go back and see, here were some others. And you can see Angela there has her crown on her head. So that was the way she had chosen
Hi,
to do it.
I'm Karen Pizer. A lot of people mispronounce Pizer. They say Peaser or something else, but it's Karen Pizer, P-E-I-S-E-R.
And there's Karen, making sure we know how to pronounce her name correctly. And here was my response back to Karen. Hey, Karen, I just wanted to say thanks for making your Flipgrid video. It looked awesome. And so as you can see, there's just, you make videos and then you can reply to them if you have it set up that way. It's a great way to get students voice, to capture all of their voices. None of us chose to do the audio only, but again, if you had someone that was just really shy and just didn't, it can be awkward to look at yourself on video. You can do that audio only option for them as well. So even within this app, you can differentiate for different learners. So love Flipgrid. It's very easy. If you've ever used it, you'll just go it's free. Everything we're talking about today is free. I love free. And so you can make yourself a Flipgrid account. And then, but from the student side, after you've set up your teacher account and made your first Flipgrid, which they will walk you through, it's very intuitive. But from the student side, all they have to do is you share the link with them. They click record a response. They're going to have their camera pop up either on their phone or on their computer. And then they'll have all these different options, but all they have to do is click the record and then they upload their video, push complete, and it's a success. So it's a very quick process. I've used this with very young learners, like fifth graders. I've used it with adult learners. And I have never had a person, I don't want to say never, because never say never, but I cannot think of a time where I have had a person who couldn't manage the technology side of this, because it's just very intuitive and follows, people make videos like video chat and FaceTime during their real life. And so this kind of builds on skills they already have. Okay. All right. So that is step one of a differentiated classroom, is make sure it's student-centered. And so by student-centered, we mean make sure that you're elevating student choice and student voice. You can do that through Flipgrid. You can do that through choice boards. There are many ways to elevate choice and voice, but just give some thought to your own classroom about how you could make those things more central. Okay, I'm going to stop for just a second to see if anyone has any questions or any issues, wants to just comment on anything. Anybody ever used Flipgrid before? Anybody ever used a choice board before? No questions? Anyone else? I'll give just a second just to see. I might get just a little bit of water since I'm talking so much. Okay, step two then is going to be, okay, so step one was student-centered instruction. Step two is know your students. Know your students and then adjust accordingly. So the next step in the process is, if you're going to get all those students up the mountain and you're going to give them different paths to get there, you've got to know something about these people. You've got to know who they are and what their needs are. And so we're going to talk about how you can get to know your students and what that looks like. Wendy says, I've used choice boards a ton. They are a very easy entry point to use differentiation. Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly right. Yay. Thank you for that endorsement of choice boards. All right, let's do step two, knowing your students. All right, so back to Carol Ann Tomlinson, our guru on differentiation. What she said was that you need to be documenting what you know about your students. And so she makes the suggestion that you get an index card for every student that you teach. Now, I don't know if you're a tech person or not a tech person, so don't get super caught up in the index card thing. The key is to document it somehow. So this could be in a Google spreadsheet or, some other way. But just her suggestion was on the front of the index card to write the student's name. And I would also add, you may want to kind of phonetically spell out how you say their name, especially if it's one that's harder to pronounce. So if you've done that Flipgrid, you can go listen to it and then maybe write out some notes to yourself to remember how to say it. So you got their student name. Then on the back, she's going to recommend that you include a bunch of different information, all the information that you know about that one student. And so in the middle, she puts student interests. So what types of things does this person enjoy? Maybe soccer, maybe mysteries, maybe video games. Like I said, in one of my classes, I realized real early on, oh, I've got a bunch of musicians in here. So, and then you figure out, okay, knowing that, how can I use that to my advantage in my classroom? So student interests, any kind of assessment data, proficiency level, anything that kind of lets you know where they are as they're coming into your classroom, just in terms of their level. If it's relevant to where you're teaching, their classification, if you were teaching in a high school, this would be like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. If you were teaching, in an adult ed, this might be kind of their level. It may be the same thing as assessment data and proficiency level. It may be something different depending on how your group does it. But if they have a classification, that's where that would go. Accommodations. So any kind of special issues that you need to be aware of for these students. I think about this story I tell a lot, and then I always feel so embarrassed telling it. But sometimes I think we can learn from our failures just as much as we can learn from our successes. And so when I think about this, and specifically writing this stuff down, I remember a student that I was teaching, been a while now, thankfully, maybe 8 years ago, who let me know on the first day of class that she had narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a condition where you fall asleep, not wanting to, but your body just falls asleep. And so she let me know, hey, I may fall asleep during your class. I want to let you know that I have this condition. Just please be aware. And of course, this was the first day of class. I was trying to, the first day of class is always crazy. You've got so many different things going on. I think I was teaching 100 students that particular semester. So I had a lot of students to keep in mind. I was younger and it was 8 years ago. So I think I have 2 children, but I think I'd already had one, but I must have still felt like I had some brain cells left because I just thought, I'm going to remember that. And then sure enough, it got a couple weeks into the semester. I'm teaching. I noticed that I have a student falling asleep a lot in class, and I don't put 2 and 2 together. And so I was asked if there were any students that I had concerns about. And so I had filled out a form online from the university where I was teaching saying, I'm concerned about this particular student because she keeps falling asleep in class. And so the university reached out to her to see what was going on. Well, she came back to me and she said, I just talked with the university and I think maybe you forgot that we had this conversation. And there was egg all over my face because I had just forgotten. And so that's why it's good to write these things down. That's when I learned, write it down, because don't assume that your young brain is going to remember this. And now my old brain. And so anyway, it's important to write all this stuff down, and especially things like accommodations. So you have it all in one place. And then last thing, maybe learning preferences. Maybe they have, they like to work by themselves. Maybe they like to work in groups, and you've noticed this about them and you want to write that down. Maybe you were doing that little choice board where the students could work with a teacher or solo, and you notice this one student always tends to want to work by themselves. That might be an interesting thing to note. Maybe you noticed that they were musical, or maybe you noticed that they seem to be not taking a lot of notes, seem to be more auditory. So this is where you could write that kind of stuff down. So know your students. For me, one of the ways that I get to know my students at the beginning of every class is I do an activity, and there's a million activities out there for get to know you. And I want to hear from you in a second as to what you use. But what I use is one of the ones I use is the word selfie. And so on the first day of class or first week, I ask them to think of their favorite word. And this could be a word that is meaningful to them. It could be a word from their first language. It could be a word that they think is just funny, like banana. If banana is a funny word, I don't know. And share with the class. They take a selfie with their word, and then they share with the class what word they chose and why. And so sometimes I'll do this on Flipgrid. I've also done it where I've done it in a face-to-face class where instead of actually taking a selfie, they just actually share the word verbally in class. So lots of ways to do this. But here's some of my students, and you see I'm here up at the top. I model it for them by sharing my word. I use the word tenacity, so I go like real fancy words. But I talk about tenacity and why that word is important to me. But over the years, I've had students choose lots of different words. This one here, self-esteem, which really helped me to understand that student early on, some of the issues that she was struggling with, and helped me to think about what types of groups I might want her to be in later. This guy down here posed with all of his musical instruments, and he used the word melody. So again, I'm like, okay, he likes music. This gentleman chose integrity. And I think he wanted to be a teacher. So I think that's why he's got his dry erase board. And then down here, this woman had extrovert, and she was such an extrovert. And so I know as soon as I saw her word and heard her explanation, I thought I know how I'm going to use her in this class. She's going to be one of my leaders, and she was. So that's one of the ways I get to know my students. What do you do to get to know your students at the beginning of classes? What are your icebreakers, your get to know yous? What's worked for you? I'll give you a second, either in the chat or if you want to turn on your microphone. Jaylyn was brave for us. If anyone else wants to join her.
Hi, my name is Heidi. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi. So what I like to do is when I do their intakes, I like to talk about what they do, and that's a one-on-one that I have with the student to get to know them. So I think that's a great opportunity while we're doing their intake application. Take the time to just sit with them and do that one-on-one with them.
Perfect. Yeah. And I love that it's one-on-one, because then you can really ask follow-up questions and really get to know a little bit more about them on a personal level.
Yes, definitely.
Do you document that, or what do you do with that information?
I document it. I try to keep up a notebook, especially if it's important things like, what they like to do as far as looking for a job or what they want to further on, either get their GED, little things like that where I think are important to me to remember. But most of the time I get to see them on a daily basis. So I get to keep up with that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Heidi. And Amy, you're saying it also in the chat. I didn't say that, but it's really important, especially in adult ed. What are their goals? Why are they here? And what is it that they're trying to accomplish? Because that gives you a lot of information about them and about kind of what are they prioritizing? Why are you here? So thank you for mentioning that one, Heidi and Amy. Great addition. Anyone else? Ahu says, I use name tense. And if I'm saying your name wrong, please correct me. But name tents are awesome. I've done a name tent before so it's like you take a piece of paper and you fold it over, what is that, hot dog style, where it's like the long way. And up in the four corners of the name tent, you can write like 4 facts about yourself, or maybe draw pictures that represent something with you. So it's not just their name necessarily, but it can be additional information beyond their name. Love it. Oh, and okay. And so, yes. So Ahu was saying, yes, I use them like index cards and then collect them. Hey, so you don't have to do the writing. They did the writing and you get to keep them. So very efficient. I like it. I like it. Anyone else? All right, good deal. Love it. Okay, so that's some examples of how we can get to know our students. If it's really hard to differentiate if we don't know who they are. Up until this point, though, when we talk about knowledge of students, what we've talked about is kind of fact collecting about them. Okay, what's the facts? And a lot of those facts are static, right? Like, how many kids do you have? What are your hobbies? What is your current proficiency level, etc. Things that are stable, or at least not changing rapidly. But there's another aspect of knowledge of students, and that is performing what we call ongoing formative assessment. And this is where teachers have the opportunity to determine where the student is in their journey towards mastery of either the day's learning objective or of broader language goals that they have. So that means that if we're all walking up this mountain, as we've talked about as our metaphor, where are you in the journey? Not just what are the kind of some of the things that I might need to know about you to help get you to the top, but as we're going along, how's it going? How are you doing? And so that's what we use formative assessment for, is to figure out where is the student in their current journey. So one way to do this is a real-time poll. There are, let me preface by saying, bazillions of ways to do formative assessment and many, many, many online tools and low-tech things or no-tech things. You can do a thumbs up as a formative assessment. You can do, I saw recently, as we think about social distance classrooms, if you happen to be teaching in a social distance classroom where everyone's wearing masks, you could have colored cards that students hold up, red or yellow or green, and you ask them to hold up a card to indicate their answer to a question, maybe A, B, C, or D, or true or false, or something like that. So there are no tech ways of doing this. A few techie ways of doing this is to do some sort of real-time poll as you're teaching. And again, it's like you've just taught something and then you want to see, are they with me? Did they get it? Remember my example earlier when I was teaching about verbs and I was like, they did not get it. The way I knew they did not get it is I did a formative assessment and realized, whoops, I need to go back and reteach some of that. And so we constantly want to be probing our students to see where are they as they're moving along in the process. So if you're using Zoom or Canvas, even if you're using a more formal learning management platform, if you're using Google Meet, all of those types of programs have some kind of polling feature built in where you can do these polls to see how students are learning. There's also, like I said, a lot of third-party options. So I showed you earlier, Mentimeter was the one we used where we were marking ourselves on the state of Arkansas. Poll Everywhere is the one that's here in the middle of the screen. I like that one a lot. I think I like Mentimeter better, honestly, though. Kahoot is a fantastic way to do formative assessment. I find that many, many teachers are already familiar with Kahoot as a formative assessment tool, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that one just because it's a good example of what formative assessment is and how you can get knowledge of students from it. And it's also fun, which makes it just more enjoyable for everyone. So just so in case you've never played a Kahoot, I'm going to imagine most of you have. Oh, Marcia's telling us Zoom now has Kahoot as an app. So you can integrate the two together, Marcia?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Very cool. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, you see what they call app smashing, where you see two different technology companies like smashing together or collaborating. It makes it so nice. Just in case, I'm going to assume most of you have done Kahoot before, but just in case, Kahoot is, you don't need an app to play it. Students just need their phone. They go to a website, they enter a game pin, like we did earlier with Menti. They enter their name, and then on their phone, they see red triangle, blue diamond, yellow circle, green square. And that corresponds to what they're seeing up on the screen, the teacher's screen, which is some kind of a question. And so if it would look like this on the teacher's screen where you see kind of a game code. This is not a live game code, so don't type it in. But you have students logging in with their different names. So all of my students here are adult learner, English learner, etc. If anyone puts in an inappropriate name, you don't have to worry about this with adult learners as much, but if you play with fifth graders, you do. If someone puts in an inappropriate name, you can just click on it and it kicks them out of the game. They have to go choose an appropriate name. Or if you have a student that just made a typo or something in their own name, you can do that. And then the question comes up on the screen. And you see, they'll see the question. When students don't feel very comfortable, they can't learn And then you've got 4 options: effective, effectively, very effective, or good. And so they would be choosing the corresponding blue diamond, red triangle, etc., for their answer. And then on their screen, they just find out if they're correct or incorrect. Now, Kahoot is super fun because it's gamified, and so you get points, and there's a leaderboard, and at the end there's a podium, and there's like a celebration with confetti if you're the winner, and so it can be a lot of fun. But the part that I want to focus on is the formative assessment part, because even though it can be a great way to liven up a classroom, where it's really important is what you learn about your students after they've played the Kahoot, because it's giving you data, it's giving you information about where are they in their learning journey. So when it's all over, the podium has already been done, the confetti has been popped, we already know who the winner is, and you have turned off your screen so that students are no longer looking at this. You can go back either, maybe directly after class or once you get back to your office and or your home, and you can go and view the report of your different learners. So I have 5 learners in my pretend class here. Awesome. EL, adult learner, English learner, ELL, and English student. So my 5 learners there. And so I can go after we've played, I can view the report. And when I view the report, I'll see something like this. Kahoot has been changing how they do their reports, but it'll look something like this, where I'll see my students' names and I can see their accuracy. And so what I find here is that 2 of my learners scored 100%. One of my learners scored 80%. Generally speaking, we consider 80% mastery. There are different reasons, and that's debatable. It depends, but a lot of times we think of 80% and above as mastery. So I've got 3 students that I would say, okay, that topic that I just taught, they've got it. I think we're pretty good. But then I look at student number 4, ELL, and I see, okay, 60%. Okay, we may be struggling there. I may need to look into that a little more. And then I see English student got 40%, and that concerns me. And so I start thinking about, okay, I recognize that I'm going to need to differentiate here in some way. I'm going to need to figure out, it probably isn't going to make sense for me to reteach that whole concept again, because clearly I have 2 to 3 students who don't need that. But I have a couple that do, and that means I need to come up with 2 different paths as we move forward. And so that's the beauty of formative assessment, is it gives you a snapshot of where are the students right now and who needs what at this particular moment in time. And it tells you what you need to do next. A lot of times people think of formative assessments as like quizzes or quiz grades and stuff. In reality, formative assessment is not as much for the students as it is for you to know what is my next instructional move. You can go down and you can see the individual questions to see, what questions were more problematic. And so it could be that even within those students that there was one question that was more of a problem, which tells you maybe specifically what you need to go back and reteach. And so you can drill down all of that data, and you can even download all of it into a spreadsheet and take a look at it. So I like Kahoot for formative assessment data because it helps me to know my students, not just whether they like football or have narcolepsy, which all of those things are really important, but also where are they in their journey. If you happen to be using Cambridge materials, Cambridge has partnered with Kahoot, just like we talked about App Smashing. Zoom has partnered with Kahoot. And so you can find ready-made Kahoots for all of the ventures curriculum and some others. So Robin, you might be able to share the link to that. I didn't have that readily available, but if you happen to be using ventures, you can make your own Kahoots. I've made Kahoots, mini Kahoots. But if your curriculum that you're using already has them ready made, that's less work for you. So that's just a resource that's available to you. And so you guys are my class today. many of you are very knowledgeable about this already, but just as an example, and just to kind of mix things up a little bit, let's play a Kahoot real quick together, just to see what we've learned so far in our time, because we're about halfway through our session for today. And so I want to know kind of how are we doing in terms of learning about our first two things. So let me switch over to Kahoot, and we'll play a quick Kahoot together. 1 second, I'm switching sides. All right. Got the music going. Let me just get the right screen up. Okay, our Kahoot number is going to be, let me put it in the chat. It's kahoot.it is the website, and our number is going to be 713-0337. All right, looks like a few of you are getting logged in. Thank you, thank you. Now, Kahoot, if you've never played, it rewards accuracy. So you want to get the question right, but it also rewards speed. So you want to do both. Oh, good. I see Ahu was saying that that has never played before. So yay, you'll get to see Kahoot. This is a great tool for your teacher toolkit. And again, don't worry, this is a low stakes thing. So, and that's why we do it, is because these are not like high stakes testing environments for our students. It's just something fun that gives us information about how we're doing so far. All right, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in so far. Anyone else want to play with us? Oh, good. One more. Kahoot has this kind of, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's music. You can customize it. They have Halloween music now that it's October, so it's like spooky music. So lots of fun. See if anyone else is going to join us, and I'll go ahead and start our Kahoot here in a second. Okay, let's see how we're doing so far today. Arkansas Adult Ed. Okay, so here's the question. Which publishing company is hosting today's session? You remember that? Is it Oxford University Press, Heinemann Press, Saddleback Education, or Cambridge University Press? Remember? And if you know, just click the correct color and shape. I've got 2 people that have answered so far. All right, okay. And it looks like we only had 3 people answer, and I had it set for, I think, 15 or 20 seconds. So if you didn't answer, that's okay. But yes, it was Cambridge is hosting our session today, and we're gonna spend we're coming up into our 2nd hour, and so we're gonna look a little bit more at Ventures curriculum here in a minute. Who was the fastest? AR. Nice job. Eve and Ahu were the 2nd and 3rd. All right, here's true, false. Climbing a mountain is a metaphor for differentiation. True or false? Perfect. Yep, that one was true. Yeah, so we've been talking about that's the way we think about what it means to differentiate a classroom. All right. Ooh, and we had a change in leaderboard. So Eve, way to go. Super fast. All right, 3. There's only 5 questions here. This is 3. Differentiated classrooms elevate student homework and testing, voice and choice, or reading and writing. Karina, I see that you're putting in the chat. You can, if you're not playing Kahoot with us, you can feel free to answer in the chat. We'll give you credit for those answers. Perfect, voice and choice. Y'all are doing great. We got number 4. All right, Eve, you're on fire. All right, next one, number 4. when students are given a variety of ways to demonstrate their knowledge, this is differentiation of, ooh, all right, variety of ways to demonstrate their knowledge. Is that product, process, or content? Ooh, that's a tough one. That's right. All right. Yes, it was product. Yeah, it was product. Okay. And this one, I put this one in because I knew that would probably be like something that would be hard to remember from our talk today. And so again, if this is my class and I'm trying to decide what my next move is, this tells me I may need to go back and reteach this topic, or I may need to see who's still not quite sure on this and find a different path for them. This is the formative assessment piece. All right, and let's do our number 5 here. Looks like we had a change in leaders, so it's going to come down to the end. Come down to the end. All right, Kahoot ensures knowledge of students through high stakes testing, storification, or formative assessment. That's right. Ooh, we got that one right away. Don't need to talk about that anymore because you've got that formative assessment down. Good deal. Okay, so this is our podium. So 3rd place went to Eve. Nice job. 2nd place went to JJ out of nowhere, and AR. Yeah, there we go. All right, so you can see. You can see that it's fun. And our runners up down there did a nice job. So again, when you're doing this with your students, at this point, you know, this is where you stop sharing with your students, but really the next thing that you do is the most critical piece with Kahoot or any formative assessment tool. And that is, you know, for me, going and clicking on view full report, and look, it says, have you stopped sharing your screen? Because they know you don't want your students to see how their classmates have performed. And so I'm not going to, because for instructional purposes, I'm going to show you the behind the scenes, but I can go into my report and I can go in and say, okay, what were the questions? All right. You know, and here's the different correct and incorrect. And this gives me information about, first of all, my own teaching. What did I teach well? And what did I not teach well? What do we need to go back over? And then I can go into the individual players and see who did what. So that's the whole point, is it's not, you know, it's fun for the students, but for the teacher, it's so that you can make sure that you're making good decisions about what to do next. Okay, let's see. Couple of questions here in the app, in our chat was, Ahu was asking, how do you put the questions on the app? And so you can go and create, oh, you saw the create button, good. Yeah, you can go make your own free Kahoot account. I just use my Google, I like sign in with Google, so I don't even have to come up with a new username and password. And then you can go search Kahoots that are already created. So let's say you're teaching about the past tense. You could probably find at least 100 past tense Kahoots, and you can go find one that's already made and just play a ready-made one. Or you could create your own, like I did, with the questions customized to what I'm teaching. So, all right, Letitia wants to tell us, and again, if I'm saying your name wrong, please tell me. Just a heads up that if you use it on Zoom and your student is using their phone, the Kahoot answer screen doesn't have the text of the options. That's right. And they can't see your screen with answer options if they're using their phone. Yeah, so exactly. On the phone, you don't see the questions. You only see the triangle, square, diamond, whatever they were. And so you have to share your screen so that way they can see the questions. That's exactly right. And a lot of times I'll do that, plus I read the questions and the answer choices like I did for you guys. So that way, if there's any issues with seeing it, they can still hear it. So, okay, thank you for sharing that tip. I love that teacher tip. Anything else before we finish our thought on formative assessment? Oh yeah, there may not be time for them to flip back and forth between the options in the Kahoot screen. Oh, if they're doing everything on their phone is what you mean, right? Like if they're doing Zoom on their phone and doing the Kahoot on their phone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. It's a limitation of Kahoot, is that if they're doing everything on their phone, it's going to be really hard. And so that's one of those things that you kind of have to think about if you're teaching online is Kahoot. If most of your students are doing their instruction on their phone, maybe that's not the best way to do polling. You might want to do like the in Zoom polls instead, because of the tech things. And it raises a great point, Letitia, too, that one of the pieces of data that you may want to be collecting, that knowledge of students, especially if you're teaching online, is what kind of device are you logging in with? Right? Because we don't know. On a Zoom screen, you just see a bunch of names, and you might see Zoom video, but you might not. But we don't know if somebody's working from their phone or what they're doing. Even today, some of you may be multitasking and making breakfast for your families and listening to this as you're doing something else. And some of you may be seated in front of a computer screen. And so that's always a very helpful piece of information to know about your students is how are you accessing this information? Because it might change which tool you use. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you. Okay, so the whole idea here with formative assessment and knowledge of students is we need to get to know information about them, the facts. What do they like? What is their proficiency level? What kinds of accommodations might you need to be aware of for them? But also, where are they as in their learning? How are they doing? And so the idea is you do some kind of direct instruction. You've taught something to them. It could have been about verb tenses. It could be about how to order at a restaurant. I mean, who knows what you're teaching, but you've taught something. And then you do some kind of check for understanding. You do some kind of formative assessment to find out how are you with me? Do you know what we're talking about? Did that make sense to you? You're doing a check for understanding, a formative assessment. Then that critical piece, you look at the report and you analyze that data, and then you assign a pathway up the mountain based on that information. I think about a child that this was about a year ago. Actually, I was in both a K-12 and adult ed classroom at the same time, teaching two different groups of students. But in my K-12 classroom, I had a student. We were learning about Cinderella. And we were comparing different versions of Cinderella, different historical versions. There's lots of different Cinderella stories in different cultures. And we were comparing them to the Disney version of Cinderella. Well, come to find out, through my check for understanding and formative assessment, I had a student, actually I had several, who they've never seen Cinderella, the Disney version. And so for them to compare kind of these other cultural versions to that Disney version was not going to work out very well because they didn't know the Disney story. Most of the class, at least 95% of the class, knew the Disney Cinderella. So it probably wouldn't have been a good use of time for me to take a lesson to teach that, just for that small percentage of students that didn't know it. But it also didn't make sense for me to keep going without getting that background information for those particular students. And so I needed to assign a slightly different pathway to those students, so that way they would have the background knowledge that they needed. And so that's really what managing a differentiated class looks like. And so that's where we want to talk about step 3, which is, so step 1, just to review, was student-centered instruction, choice and voice. Step 2 was knowledge of students, knowledge, just information about who they are, what they like, what their interests are, and then ongoing information about how their learning is going through formative assessment. Okay. And then step 3 is then, now that you have that, planning flexible group configuration based on students' needs. Once you realize what their needs are, then you start thinking about, how am I going to group these students in a way that makes sense? If you come out of the K-12 world, as I think Wendy, was that right? Wendy was GT. Then this may mean something to you. If you don't, then you may not have ever heard this elbow partners and eyeball partners. And so Wendy, do you know elbow partners and eyeball partners? Does that mean something to you? Just curious. Yep. Okay. Yeah. It's a fairly common thing that you hear about in a K-12 classroom. And this is the idea that you would have a group of 4 students sitting together in a configuration in 4 desks. And so like a little group of 4. And you have one student that you're sitting next to. That's your elbow partner, is the one whose desk is next to you. And then you have another set of desks kind of across from you. And so there's one student that sits across from you at their desk and is looking back at you. And that's your eyeball partner. So your elbow partner is the one next to you. Your eyeball partner is the one across from you. And so a lot of times teachers are very strategic about who they put as a child's elbow partner and a child's eyeball partner. Often they'll put a like ability person, so someone with a similar ability level, in as the elbow partner, and someone who might be a challenge to them as the eyeball partner. And so throughout the lesson, throughout the day, the teacher can say, okay, in this activity, I want you to turn to your elbow partner and do this, or answer this question, or talk about this. Or they might say, okay, now I want you to look at your eyeball partner and have a conversation about this. This type of partnering or grouping is key to differentiation. So Tomlinson says, in a differentiated classroom, the teacher uses many different group configurations over time, and students experience many different working groups and arrangements. Okay, and so the idea is that you are trying to mix your students and get them into lots of different types of groups. Sometimes those groups are going to be like ability groups, so similar ability level. Sometimes they're going to be mixed ability because you want that challenge for them. Sometimes you're going to have standing groups, meaning that this is a group that you meet with all the time. So every week you're going to get together with this particular group and work with them. Sometimes it's ad hoc groups, which ad hoc just means kind of thrown together, or just like a temporary group. And so you may just create a group for one activity or one lesson, and then not work with that particular group again. Sometimes you just have random groups where it doesn't matter who the student is paired with. You just want them paired with somebody new, a new voice to talk to. A lot of times I'll do random groups by doing stand up, hand up, pair up, where everyone stands up and puts their hand in the air, and then they high five someone, and whoever they high five is their partner. And so that would be just a random, whoever you happen to high five is your group. But sometimes it's more strategic, where the teacher has given a lot of thought to who the student will be working with. I didn't know I had this slide, but surprise. Here's an example of the elbow and eyeball partners. It comes from this desk configuration. Now, in the era of social distancing, and if you are face-to-face at this point, depending on what kinds of regulations you have in place, this may or may not work for right now. But it's not so important, the configuration of the desks, as it is the concept of mixed ability groups and likability groups, random groups, strategic groups, etc. So there's just a visual, if it helps, a mixed ability group where you have all different folks in different groups. And then likability is when you're kind of sorting out into similar ability level. I have been guilty of many times, especially when I was earlier in my career, and especially when I was teaching face-to-face and even online, just saying, especially with adults, because it feels weird to instruct adults to work with other adults. That can feel uncomfortable, especially if you happen to be younger than the students you're teaching. And so I was notorious for saying, just get together with someone around you and have a conversation about, or for this activity, just find a partner. And I was not strategic. I wasn't thinking about ability level so much. I just was thinking about convenience. But really, to differentiate well for students, even adult students, we want to be thoughtful about the groups that we're putting them in, because that impacts what they do in those groups, depending on what they need to get up the mountain. And so just if you're making breakout rooms in Zoom, for example, it is so easy to just click that automatic button and it just automatically sorts everyone into breakout rooms. But I challenge you that there are times where that's helpful. Again, just like stand up, hand up, pair up, where you just want a random partner, and that's good. But there are times, many times, where you want to be thinking, okay, who needs to work with who during this next phase of the instruction? And so don't be shy about using manual and thinking strategically about your groups, in person or online. This is just a random tip that I feel like because we are in the era of online teaching, if you happen to still be teaching online, this was such a game changer for me for being able to differentiate for my students. A lot of times when I have my students go into a breakout room, if I had known that we were going to be a smaller group today, I would have planned for this so we could experience it, but I'll show you what this looks like. When you go into breakout rooms, you kind of lose the ability to see what's going on in there. Whereas in a face-to-face class, you might be working with one group of students, but you're still listening to kind of what's going on in the other parts of the room. You're watching and you're seeing who might need help. But the hard thing about Zoom classes in breakout rooms specifically is you can't see what's going on in there. You can hop from room to room, but you lose that like bird's eye view of your classroom to know who needs what support, who's done early, who needs teacher support, et cetera. And so a way that I've found in many, I stole this idea from someone else, as all good teaching ideas come from other people. But a way that I've found that works well for me is using Google Slides, where I ask each group to put some information in a Google slide. And then I go into, as the students are working, I go into grid view, and I'm able to see the work happening in real time on the Google Slides, and I'm able to monitor which groups need what. So here's an example of what it looks like. So I've set up a Google slide, and each group has their own slide that they're working in. Let's say they're just answering the exercise 3. They're just putting in, so I've asked them, hey, go into breakout room, discuss your answers to exercise 3, and then we'll get back together and talk about it. But I don't know, are they discussing exercise 3? Are they getting the right answers? Are they not? I don't know. And so if I do this Google slide thing where I have them, okay, find your group slide and enter the answers as you do your work. And then I'm watching this grid view as they're working, and I see something like this. I see that group 1 is already on answer 4. I see that group 4 is working. I see that group 5 is working. I see group 2 is working. I see group 3 has done nothing. I see, I see that group 1 has B for number 1, but group 2 has A for number 1. Group 4 has A for number 1. Group 5 has B. Well, that's formative assessment data right there. That's telling me I need to go back and review number 1 because we don't seem to all agree on that one. I also know group 3 is struggling. I need to hop into group 3 and figure out what's going on in there because there's no work happening and maybe they're having tech issues or who knows what's going on, but I need to go there. I also know, okay, group 1 and 5 are done and got mostly the correct answers. I may need to hop in there and give them a challenge question. I may need to do some kind of extension activity so that they're not all just sitting at, sitting there in their breakout rooms doing nothing while I'm working with group 3, trying to figure out what's going on there. And so giving this bird's eye view has been so helpful to me because it allows me, first of all, I can decide who goes in which group, right? But I can also see formative assessment data in real time. And it also tells me what I need to do next. So if you're teaching online, that's been a big help for me. We do those same things in the face-to-face classroom, but it's just a little bit more natural because you can kind of monitor with your eyes and ears and senses. Another thing that's been really helpful for just group work, especially online, but face-to-face too, is making sure that everyone has their own role in the group. And again, this is where you can use your knowledge of students. My student that used her word selfie and said extrovert, I said, you know what, her role could be leader. She'd be a fantastic leader of a group because she's talkative and she's extroverted, and she's going to keep everyone in the group, basically herded together. And so you can ask someone to be a scribe. You can ask someone to be the technician, who's the person that shares their screen in the group. You could ask someone to be a timekeeper. So this is a great way to manage those groups once you've decided who's in which group. And so step 3 was think about grouping. Who needs to work together? And what kinds of groups do you want or need based on the formative assessment data that you've collected? Okay. Ooh, I'm going to take a pause real quick because we're about to get into step 4, which is our last one, our last step. So we're almost there. Any questions or thoughts or comments or complaints to talk about before we keep going? I'm going to have some water. Wendy said she likes that strategy with Google Slides. It's been really helpful for me. Okay. Last step is figuring out how to manage time and expectations. And this was the question at the very beginning. I'm trying to remember who asked it. Oh, it was Jaylyn. Yeah, was asking us, how do you do this? You know, how is realistically, how do you manage the time of a classroom? How do you plan a lesson when you have all of these different levels? And so I'm going to talk kind of generally, and then I'm going to look really specifically that if you were using the ventures curriculum, what that would look like. Even if you're not using ventures, that's okay. The principles still apply, but Cambridge happens to do an especially good job of this, where you don't have to, they do it for you. So you don't have to do a lot of the planning. And so I want to show you what that looks like in the Cambridge curriculum, knowing that you could do that in others as well. Okay, so first one is managing expectations. And this kind of goes back to Jaylyn. I said this at the very beginning. This is a quote from Carol Ann Tomlinson. She said, if teachers were required to enter their first classroom with the philosophical tenets of differentiation fully in tow, we would have no teachers. We would have no teachers because this is not easy. You know, we've kind of broken it down into little steps today that make it kind of, okay, I could do a choice board, I could do Flipgrid, you know, trying to make it easier. But differentiating a classroom is very challenging. And so it is unrealistic to expect that you're going to be able to go in and do all of this for every lesson, every time, in every way for every student. It's not going to happen. We would have no teachers. This has been the past year and a half have been extremely challenging for teachers, right? And thank you for sticking through such a crazy time in education. I know your students appreciate all of the hoops and things that you've jumped through to try to figure out how to teach, maybe in a new medium online or just in the midst of a lot of chaos. If you add in like a pandemic plus differentiation, yeah, it's a lot. So know that step 1 is just manage expectations for yourself. Start small. Choose one activity that you do in your classroom and think about, could I make that more differentiated? And start there. And if you have a little success there, then start thinking, okay, what could I do next? Or what could I add in the next time I teach this course? So baby steps. Also managing time. The problem when you have everyone going up a mountain and everyone's going to the same place, but not everyone's on the same path, is not everyone learns at the same pace. And that is a challenge when you're a teacher trying to put together a lesson with a beginning and an end and then move on to whatever curriculum you use. You're trying to accomplish something in a certain amount of time and then move on to the next lesson or the next topic. And so what do you do if you have some students who get it right away and you have other students who are still, not even starting? similar to what I just showed you in my Google slides, where group 3, the rest of the groups were done and group 3 hadn't even started. And so it's, what do you do in that moment? Because you now have some that need to be on this more accelerated path and some that need additional support. And so a couple of kind of general things that have helped me is in terms of like homework or students turning in assignments. I have many years ago just realized that the only way that I could do it well was to allow students to have more time if they needed it. And so not necessarily more class time, because our class time we have to manage a certain way, but the ability to turn something in late if they need to. You may not be in the kind of class where you have grades and those types of things, but I just, part of it is just recognizing students need more time and we need to give them more time if possible. Part of it is not trying to do all the work yourself, and so not reinvent the wheel. And so if you are struggling with the time, as your own time management of how do I plan a lesson like this, then I say defer to the experts, defer to those who have already given some thought to this. And so so one group that has given a lot of thought to this is Cambridge, the publishing company, and they've put out this ventures curriculum, and they've already figured out the tenets of differentiation, and they've figured out what it needs to look like. And so I want to know who's using ventures and who's not, so I kind of know if we need to focus specifically on how to do it in a ventures classroom, if we need to talk more broadly about how do you do this in any curriculum. So if you would, we're going to do one more Menti together, menti.com. And if you decide to use Mentimeter in your class, it's free, but they only give you 2 slides per code. And so I already used my 2 slides at the beginning of this presentation for the first code. So we're switching codes. So if you wouldn't mind going in to menti.com, 5740-6349 is going to be our code. And I'm curious to know about what curriculum you're using basically in your classroom. So let me go find my Menti here and get us switched out. Here it is. I'm going to switch over and see. All right, so first question is, are you currently using the Cambridge Ventures curriculum in your classroom? 100% said yes. I think only one person has voted so far though. Anyone else? Menti.com, and the code is 5740-6349. All right, now that's looking a little bit better, half and half. Anyone else going to vote for us? Letitia can't see the question. Can you see it now? Am I not sharing my screen correctly? It's are you currently using the Cambridge Ventures curriculum in your classroom? And it's just a yes or no question. Okay. So looks like most are not. Super helpful. Give just a couple more seconds and then we'll move on. I think I have one more question for you. Okay, Marcia's saying that they may have some in the library, but not sure. Yeah, again, no worries if you're not using it. This next part will still be helpful. It's the Cambridge curriculum is like ready-made for differentiation, whereas you can take the principles and apply it to whatever you're using. So I just wanted to know, so that way I knew, knowledge of students. What's our background information here? Okay, and next question. Oh, hopefully you're able to see this one. Which step are you most wanting to strengthen in your own classroom that we've talked about so far? Which one? Step 1 is elevating student voice and choice. Step 2 is know your students and plan accordingly. Step 3 is utilize flexible group configurations, or step 4 is manage time and expectations. So obviously these are all 4 good things to do, but which one most sticks out to you is like, I want to do that. Good deal. Looks like step 1 is winning. Voice and choice. That's a great place to start. Give it just another second to see if anyone else wants to share. All right, good deal. Very helpful, very helpful. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how do you manage time, and how do you organize a class that is going to be differentiated? How do you spend your time? And oh, Letitia, I see maybe I don't know why some of those questions weren't showing up correctly. But thank you for answering those of you that did. Okay, so if you do happen to be using Ventures, just for those, a couple of folks that said they were, if you go to the website here, which is, it's Cambridge /Ventures, Robin, you can share that site if you happen to have it. But if you go there, you can go to resources. There's a resources page. Oh, you have to click on I'm a teacher. Otherwise you see the wrong resources. So you go to resources and you scroll down to, let's see, scroll. Oh, to resource type. And then at the very bottom, it's going to show multi-level lesson planner and multi-level worksheets. And so this is kind of the ready-made stuff that they have that's already differentiated. And then you can find kind of different resources. Specifically, what I'm going to be talking about here in the next few minutes is from a resource called the Multi-Level Lesson Planner. And this is a wonderful resource that explains how do you actually conduct a classroom that's multi-level with this curriculum. And here's the QR code with this dinosaur on it if you want to go look at this yourself. So if you would like to look at this later, if you are using Ventures, this is a fantastic resource. I went ahead and read it for us, the all 23 pages, and condensed it down to a few slides to help you. So I'll kind of condense what I learned from that resource and how it's recommending that you structure your classroom. Okay, so first of all, there's 2 types of mixed ability classrooms. One is a level specific classroom, where everyone is working out of the same curriculum, right? So we're all working out of the same workbook together. So everyone is technically the same level, but even then, let's say everyone is a beginner, for example, even within that, you're going to have differentiation going on. We know that our classes are not homogeneous. Our students are not all on the same level, even if technically they have assessed or been tested into a specific class. But a level specific classroom is where everyone's working out of the same book. A non-level specific class is a one-room classroom. Think about like the olden days when you had like K through 12 all in the same classroom with the same teacher. Talk about differentiation. So this is when you have students working out various levels of venture. So that's a non-level specific classroom. In a level specific classroom, Ventures is going to have 3 different worksheets for what they call below level, on level, and above level. And it doesn't say that on the worksheet. It doesn't say below level, because obviously that is a problematic label for students. But it just puts so think of it, even though the curriculum is going to talk about it as below, on, or above level, just think of it as like easy, medium, and hard. Okay, there's just 3 different levels of challenge. And so the first worksheet is going to have a check on the easy version. And that's the far left one here. The kind of medium level version is here with a check in the middle. And then the hard version of the worksheet is kind of over here with a check on the right. And so this particular curriculum gives you 3 different worksheets for 3 different types of students that are all on lesson D, unit 1 reading. Now, actually, the answers are all the same. So you know, when you go to check this, everyone is going to be saying, okay, what is an example of a city? Boston, Miami, San Francisco. Over here in the medium level, what's an example of a city? Boston, Miami, San Francisco. But the level of challenge has changed slightly. In the first one, you're just circling the word. In the second one, you're having to you're having to actually find the word from a word bank and write it down in the appropriate column. In the third one, they're actually having to add in the headers for the columns as well. So it's just the level of challenge is slightly different for each one. And so the idea here is that it's a little bit of differentiating in process, how students are making sense of the information. So what they're going to recommend, and this is a great formula for a differentiated classroom regardless, is to open as whole group. So everyone in the room gets together and we all are working on, building community. So you may have some kind of a mixer, icebreaker, or conversation starter. So you're building community as a whole group, and then you're introducing the unit or theme or the skill that you're doing that day, whatever the lesson is, you're introducing the topic for the day. And this may be where you do your direct instruction, is your teaching of the information in whole group. But you're going to move then into breakout activities. And the breakout activities, you're going to choose to be like ability groups. In that first opening part, you could have done one of those random mixing of people, mixed ability groups, where you, somehow just like on Zoom, if you do your breakout groups, you can just say, just randomly put whoever, wherever, and they're talking to whoever. Or you could build community based on interests. So all the people who are, interested in soccer can go over here, and all the people who are interested in another sport can go over in another area to build community. So in the whole group, you can do more of your mixed groups or your random groups. But when you go to breakout activities, you start getting into your like ability groups. And so again, if you look at the materials, they're going to say low level, mid-level, high level. Again, just think of it as easy, medium, and hard. And so you might have a group, an easy group kind of together. You might have a mid-level group together and a high-level group working on an assignment, and they may be doing something, activity or whatever it is that you have going on. And then you might get back together, whole group, discuss, check the answers, check in, and then go back into breakout rooms and do another activity with likability groups, and then come back together, debrief, and then maybe a third activity in breakout rooms. And the teacher is going to think about spending a significant amount of time with each group during one of the 3 breakout sessions. So that way each group is getting specific teacher time. It's important that even the hard group, the high level group, get time with the teacher. It's not just find something for students to do independently so you can go then focus on the group that needs more support. You want to spend time with all groups. And so you want to be thinking about, how can I make sure that I get to every group to support them? And then at the end, you get back together, whole group, and close out. And that's where you want to do some kind of assessment to see, what did we learn, get some data, so that way you can figure out who needs to be in what group the next time we're together. Sometimes teachers of adults get nervous when they think about this idea of low level, mid-level, high level, because they think, how discouraging, right? To a student to be like, you're going to be in the low level group today. That's not how this works. That may be how the curriculum kind of talks about it, so that you can be like, okay, this is students that need more support. But in reality, I found that students often know or are able to choose for themselves what they need. And so I have done it before where I'll say, hey, I have an easy, medium, and hard option for you tonight. Who's feeling up for the challenge? Who wants to be challenged tonight? And often the students will self-select. They know which group they need to be in. Others are tired. They've had a long day. Their kids are screaming in the background if it's online, or, who knows what's going on. And they say, you know what, I just need the easy path tonight. In which case they self-select the easy worksheet. And so I don't think this necessarily has to be hidden from the students, that these are, that there's an easy path and a hard path. But also just explaining to them, especially if you have someone that's struggling in reading, for example, you may say, hey, I think this might be a great activity for you tonight, and we can build up to the medium level once you feel comfortable. And so it can be kind of a conversation with you and the student. So it takes away some of that awkwardness. Okay, and so just to zoom in on that, it's during that breakout time, you'll see that it's saying the low level students during the first breakout session, assuming you have 3 breakouts during the class, the teacher is with your easy group, and they're really doing a lot of support with that group during that first breakout. The mid-level group have a group leader assigned to them. Again, find your extrovert, find that leader that's in the group and say, okay, you're going to be the leader tonight. And they're helping the students go through the activity. And then it could be that your high level students could do some kind of independent work where they don't even have to work in a group setting. They could work on their own and aren't needing a lot of collaboration in that moment. And then when you go down to the next breakout room, the teacher is now going to focus on that medium group, the mid-level group, while the low levels have a group leader and the high levels are still working independently. And then at the end, that third breakout room, the teacher moves to the high level to check in with them, see how they went, see what questions they have, maybe to challenge them with some kind of extended, it could be additional questions. It could be just moving them a little bit further along in their thinking. Whereas the low level or easy group is now doing something with a group leader leading them through because they've had a lot of support up to that point. So they're ready for that. And the mid-level group is ready to work independently. So it's just thinking about your different groups and what level of support they need. If you happen to be in a 1-room classroom where you've got like everybody, all levels, I think we had someone at the beginning saying, this is me. The nice thing about this ventures curriculum is that if you use a theme, so you say, okay, I'm going to choose a theme, and this curriculum would already have the theme established. If regardless of which book that you're in, everyone is on the same theme. So we're all talking about restaurants this week. And it doesn't matter if I'm at the beginning level or I'm at the advanced level, we're all talking about restaurants. And everyone has a book that's structured the same way. So, okay, we're all talking about restaurants and we're all doing a reading activity. Now it's going to be on very different levels, but we can all break out into our rooms and do our reading activities. And then also in this particular curriculum, you have QR codes and answer keys that will help facilitate that as independent work. So you can scan the QR code, watch the video, the answer keys are there for you so you can self-check and self-correct. And so it kind of moves the responsibility onto the students to do that independent work. This is a very challenging classroom to manage. But if you can think of, I'm going to choose a theme that we all talk about, that we all could have in common, and then I'm going to, during our breakout rooms, kind of tailor it to the level of my students. That's generally how you can make this work. And again, that's why it has to be student-centered. If it's all just lecture, teacher-centered, sage on the stage, you can't differentiate. It has to have some sort of group element to it because that's the only way that the teacher can customize. Okay, so again, going back to our image from the beginning, we're trying to get to something like this philosophically, something like this. Maybe we're not, again, buying the beanbag chairs and stuff, but and painting our walls green. Maybe you are, but we're trying to get to where students are each on their own individual path and the teacher is freed up to be able to support each group of students as needed. So that's the 4 steps. easy as pie, right? It's a challenge. It is. But if you'll go back to the 4 steps and think about, okay, what could I do this week in my class? Could I elevate student voice and choice? Could I do a choice board or Flipgrid? How could I get to know my students better? What activities could I do? What formative assessment data can I collect and then analyze? Or how can I configure groups a little bit better? Or how do I really want to structure my time when I'm with my students? If you break it down like that, it becomes a little bit easier. So hopefully this gives you some tools to start with. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? You said, Letitia, you said, yep, that's me. What's you? Were you the one that has everybody in the room together? Yeah, so the pre-made lesson plans for one-room classrooms, they don't have the worksheets where it's easy, medium, hard, because those are all assuming that you're on the same book doing the same activity. Whereas if you have that one where you've got like one person's working out of a beginner book and one person's working out of an intermediate book, et cetera, then thematically they're all going to be related, but the actual individual activity is going to look different for the beginners from the intermediates. But that resource that I showed you, let me go back to it. Pardon me as I like flip through all these slides and stuff. But this resource, this multi-level lesson planner, this is the thing that you're looking for to figure out how to manage that kind of a classroom. And so, and you can find this again by going to the Cambridge website and then making sure you select that you're a teacher, making sure that you they know you're a teacher, and then go to resources and then scroll down and click multi-level lesson planner. And that's going to be a fantastic resource for you. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Very informative. Do we have an evaluation to do? I don't know. I do not know. That's a great question. Does one of our event organizers have an answer to that?
I just placed it in the chat box.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So Marcia just put the Survey Monkey in there if you'd like to evaluate this presentation. I hope that you're leaving with some tools and, if nothing else, some encouragement that this is hard work. It's important work, and we appreciate the work that you're doing for sure. All right. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen then. And see if anyone else has anything else to say before we go. You guys, thank you for spending 2 hours with me. I know that was an investment of time. I really appreciate it.